Hello, Grammar 1 students. Well, we have to keep on working with the grammar book. Last week, we talked about the first chapter where the authors explained their idea that grammar should be studied, bearing in mind the three dimensions within the pie chart, which are form, meaning, and use. We also discussed the second chapter where we learn a lot of meta-language, okay, grammatical meta-language. That is, we learn words used to talk about language. And this meta-language is organized around the three levels at which grammar operates. That is the subsentential, the sentential, and the suprasentential levels. In the third chapter, the authors will discuss the lexicon. Okay, what do you think of when we say the lexicon? Most probably you associate grammar with, the lexicon with vocabulary. Okay, you're right, with words. And that's exactly what most of us have in mind, because traditionally when we talk about the lexicon, we think of a mental inventory of words and productive word derivational processes, okay? Now, Seltzer Murcia, Larsen Freeman suggest using a broader view where we include not just single words, but three units: individual words and their components, word compounds and co-occurrences, and conventionalized multiple phrases. The last of these units would be what I usually call chunks. Remember, we have said this before, that when we learn language, we learn words, we learn the rules of grammar, but there are many things that we learn as chunks, okay? Well, those stretches would correspond to what the authors refer to as conventionalized multiple phrases. It is important to discuss the question of lexical grammar. They talk about grammar in their book, but they think of lexis and grammar, or the lexicon and grammar, as a unit. In this respect, they follow Halliday's ideas, okay? Michael Halliday, who is the key figure within functional grammar, in his introduction to functional grammar, he explains that he conceives lexis and grammar as a unit, in fact, as a continuum, all right? Here the authors explain some reasons why they think of lexis and grammar as a unit. They give three main reasons for this. One would be the interlingual argument, which has to do with the fact that what you achieve by grammatical means in one language, you may achieve lexically in another. This sounds a little bit difficult, but it is not. Let's think of an example from two languages we know well, English and Spanish, all right? For example, in Spanish, you may talk about mi hermanita, all right? And what does it mean? Well, it shows you love your sister, okay? You're showing endearment, closeness. How do you achieve that in Spanish? Well, by grammatical means, okay? You inflect the noun, and you have this diminutive. This form shows endearment. Now, can we do that the same way in English? No, there is no grammatical means of showing endearment. We have to resort to lexical means. So most probably something equivalent would be my little sister, okay? There's a second argument, the intralingual argument, which has to do with what happens, okay, within one language. The authors provide the example of, by the way, or any other, let's say, phrase, these stretches in the language that conform to the rules of grammar, so they are somehow in between lexis and grammar. When you say on top of that, you can consider that as a chunk which has a meaning, so you associate it with lexis, but on the other hand, okay, it follows the rules of grammar in terms, for example, of word order. So it is also associated with grammar. It is in between. And the third argument has to do with concreteness of meaning. If you have been working on parts of speech, and we say that that, for example, the noun, okay, is somehow more meaningful than a function word, such as a preposition. But what about in, on, under? Those are prepositions which are said to have almost no meaning, but in those particular cases, they carry quite a lot of meaning, right? So it is difficult to say where they belong. Do they belong to the grammar end of the cline, or to the lexical end of the cline? So the idea after reading this chapter is that we think of the complexity of the lexicon. What does it mean to know a word? Because when somebody asks you, okay, do you know this word? Yes. What do you think of meaning? All right, the dictionary entry maybe, but that's not enough. Knowing a word involves, of course, knowing how to spell the word, its phonetic representation and how it is pronounced, and then morphological irregularities, okay, morphological aspects related to the word, some syntactic features and restrictions, common derivations and collocations, semantic features and restrictions, and pragmatic features and restrictions. Well, if we look at these, remember the dimensions we mentioned before when we studied grammar. In fact, now we know when we study lexical grammar, we should bear in mind form, meaning, and use. When we talk about spelling, phonetic representation, morphological irregularities, we immediately think of form, okay? Yeah, then when we think of use, okay, of meaning, that has to do with the semantic features, and the pragmatic features with use, all right, with the use dimension. Okay, the previous are related to form, semantic features to meaning, and pragmatic features to use. Let's move on. This is something that you know very well by now, because you have been reading about these and working in this with Jorge, okay? We have to know about morphological affixation. You know that there are freestanding morphemes and bound morphemes, which could be either inflectional or derivational. You know that in the case of inflectional morphemes, you only have suffixes, whereas in the case of derivational morphemes, we could talk about both suffixes and prefixes. So why is this important? Well, because we should know how to turn, for example, we should know that child is a noun, but childish, okay, is an adjective, and what that means, and how you can turn it into an adjective. There are some syntactically relevant lexical features. When you know a word, you know, a noun, for example, it is very important to know whether that noun, for example, is countable or uncountable, how it forms singular and plural, because that will somehow determine the use of determiners, okay, within the noun phrase. In the case of the adjectival phrase, we have to know as regards the prepositions used with a certain adjective. Okay, for example, you should, it's not enough knowing the meaning, let's say, of afraid. You have to know it is afraid of something, that you're interested in something, that you're, okay, ashamed of, that something is dependent on. Well, the preposition that goes with the adjective should be part of your knowledge of the lexicon. When we talk about a verb phrase, okay, we should know whether that verb is transitive or intransitive, okay? And, well, we mentioned prepositions that are very important, not just, I mean, in the case of the adjectival phrase, but also with verbs. You depend on, you think of or about, okay? You enter a place with no preposition. So, knowing a word involves knowing a lot about the word, not just meaning. In this chapter, they also talk about some productive lexical processes, compounding, with the different alternatives, okay, whether you have, I don't know, a noun-noun combination or a verb-noun combination. Then, well, they talk about derivation and conversion, which is a process through which a part of speech is converted into another without derivational affixation, okay? I mean, nowadays, very frequently you talk about, okay, you say, okay, text me. So you're using, I mean, the noun has become a verb without any morphological change. In this chapter, they also discuss homonymy and polysemy, right? Homonyms, they are words which share they have the same form and different meaning. Those two words would be homonyms. In some cases, you will find the identity both of spelling and sound, as, I don't know, when you talk about the bank, and you think of the central bank and the bank of the river, and sometimes you have two words which share pronunciation but not spelling, or the other way around, they share spelling but not pronunciation. So working with these words is very important because they are a source of problems for students, of course. And it is also important to explore those words where the same part of speech, where you have a word which has a range of meanings, okay, that may have different meanings. So that is also problematic for students. Almost at the end of the chapter, Cesar Murcia and Larsen Freeman discuss collocations and idioms. Probably you have heard of collocation. They are words that have a tendency to co-occur. And I don't know, maybe you have a dictionary of collocations at home. Yes? What is there are different definitions of collocation according to different linguists, but here we are talking about some conventional combinations whose meaning is transparent. What does it mean? That the individual words retain their meaning. If you have a dictionary of collocations, or if you've seen one, typically they tell you, for example, which, I don't know, verbs, okay, tend to co-occur with which nouns, or which adjectives with which nouns or which adverbs with which verbs. For example, which is the verb? I mean, nowadays it is possible, okay, using computers. But if we could count, which is the verb that most frequently accompanies the word needs? Okay, when you talk about needs, which is the main verb? I don't know if the main, but one of the verbs that you most frequently use with needs. What do you do with needs? Yes, you satisfy needs. Is it the only possibility? Of course not. But if we could count the number of co-occurrences, well, they very frequently come together. Or I think in the book they give the example of, how do you call that? Statistically significant. Well, that's such a, they tend to go together. They also talk about this question of collocation being more or less fixed. Okay, when we talk about, I don't know, black and white, that is a typical example of a very strong collocation. And why a very strong? Because it is fixed. You would never talk in English about white and black instead of black and white. Why? Is there a grammatical reason for that? Is there a logical reason? No, it has to do with the fact that these are conventional combinations. Some of them are very, particularly when you have two words, let's say the order is quite fixed and you can't change it. It is interesting that in Spanish, it is exactly the opposite, okay? It is blanco y negro rather than black and white. But you see that these may be a broader or a narrower definition of collocation. What about idioms? Well, idioms are also combinations and they are also conventional, but the main difference is that their meaning is not transparent in the sense that it's not so easy to realize what the phrase means by just looking at the individual words. When you say something is a piece of cake, how do you know that is easy? Well, because we know the idiom. Okay, but it is just because, let's say. Collocations and idioms are very interesting for students. And collocation is essential. You have probably worked on this or you're about to work with this when you work with cohesion, okay? So I know many of the concepts we have discussed here you had already read in the chapters related to morphology, now the ones related to parts of speech, and soon with the material related to cohesion, okay? Well, I hope you have enjoyed this. Thank you.